It all began on a quiet afternoon in my suburban neighborhood when I decided to make a change to my backyard. The fence that came with the house had seen better days, weathered and sagging. It was time for an upgrade. I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a simple wooden fence to provide some privacy and keep my dog safe. I'd checked the local regulations, hired a contractor, and got to work. That's when she showed up. Karen, the president of our HOA, stormed into my yard with a clipboard in hand. She didn't bother with a greeting. "This fence violates HOA standards," she barked, pointing at the half-built structure. I tried to stay calm, explaining that it followed the guidelines, but she cut me off, claiming she was in charge here, and demanded I tear it down immediately. At first, I thought it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe she hadn't read the same guidelines I had. I assured her I had done everything by the book. Karen wasn't having it. Her face reddened, and she accused me of ruining the aesthetic of the neighborhood. Before I could respond, she snapped a picture of the fence and stormed off, muttering about violations and fines. I thought that would be the end of it. Surely the HOA board would see that I was following the rules. But little did I know, Karen was just getting started. That was only the calm before the storm. 2 days later, I received a formal notice from the HOA. It stated that my fence had not been pre-approved and must be removed within 10 days. Attached was a hefty fine for non-compliance. I couldn't believe it. The fence wasn't even finished yet, and I had already been slapped with penalties. Frustrated, I called a meeting with the HOA board to clear things up. Karen was there, of course, leading the charge against me. But something about her tone didn't sit right. This felt personal. The HOA meeting felt less like a discussion and more like a courtroom, with Karen playing judge, jury, and executioner. She began by outlining all the ways my fence allegedly violated HOA policies, her voice dripping with smugness. She even went as far as to bring printed photos of my half-built fence, dramatically slapping them onto the table for everyone to see. "This eyesore completely disregards our community's standards," she declared. I tried to defend myself, showing the board the guidelines I had followed, and even sharing the contractor's permit approval. But Karen wasn't interested in facts. "We don't just allow anyone to make changes around here," she sneered. "If you think you can get away with this, you're mistaken." To my surprise, a couple of board members seemed uncomfortable with Karen's aggression. One of them, an older man named Mr. Davis, quietly asked Karen if she was being too harsh. "He's followed the guidelines," he said, looking at my paperwork. "Maybe this isn't a violation after all." But Karen wasn't backing down. "Rules are rules," she snapped, glaring at him. "And if we don't enforce them, this neighborhood will fall apart." She then shifted her focus to me, saying, "If you don't comply, we'll have no choice but to escalate this further. Consider this your final warning." I left that meeting feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. It was clear that Karen was using her position in the HOA to flex her power. Over the next few days, she ramped up her efforts, sending me more notices and threatening additional fines. The situation quickly escalated when she started spreading rumors about me around the neighborhood. One of my neighbors mentioned hearing Karen say I was trying to ruin property values with my fence. Another said she'd overheard Karen calling me a troublemaker who doesn't respect authority. It was exhausting, but I wasn't going to back down. The breaking point came when Karen showed up at my door one morning, unannounced and fuming. She stood there with a printed legal document in her hand, waving it in my face. "You've left us no choice," she said coldly. "The HOA is suing you." I was stunned. Suing me? Over a fence? I took the papers and quickly scanned them. Sure enough, Karen had filed a lawsuit claiming that my fence was a violation of the HOA's bylaws and was causing irreparable harm to the neighborhood's image. I could barely believe what I was reading. This wasn't about the fence anymore. It was a personal vendetta. I decided enough was enough. If Karen wanted to play hardball, I was ready to fight back. I hired a lawyer and began preparing my defense. As it turned out, Karen had a long history of pulling similar stunts with other homeowners. My lawyer discovered several complaints against her for harassment and abuse of power. Some people had even moved out of the neighborhood to escape her antics. Armed with this information, we filed a countersuit, accusing Karen and the HOA of targeting me unfairly and acting outside their authority. As the court date approached, the neighborhood began to buzz with gossip. Some neighbors quietly came to me, offering their support. "Karen's been out of control for years," one of them confided. "I'm glad someone's finally standing up to her." Others, however, were too afraid to speak up, fearing retaliation from Karen. It became clear that this was bigger than just my fence. It was about holding Karen accountable for years of bullying and misuse of power. I felt a mix of anxiety and determination as the day of the hearing drew near. The day of the court hearing finally arrived, and the tension in the room was palpable. Karen strutted in with a smug expression, accompanied by her lawyer, who looked just as self-righteous as she did. On my side, I had my lawyer and a stack of evidence, including the HOA guidelines I had followed, testimonies from neighbors, and records of Karen's history of harassment. The judge began by reviewing Karen's claims, which centered around the idea that my fence violated aesthetic standards and had not been approved by the HOA board. Karen, ever the drama queen, painted a picture of me as a defiant homeowner who had zero respect for community rules. When it was my turn to speak, my lawyer presented our case clearly and methodically. We showed the court that the fence not only met the HOA's written guidelines, but also matched the style of several other fences in the neighborhood. I emphasized that I had sought proper approvals, and even provided receipts and emails from the contractor confirming everything was above board. My lawyer then highlighted Karen's personal bias against me, introducing evidence of her history of targeting other homeowners for petty violations. The testimonies from neighbors about her harassment sealed the deal. Karen's lawyer tried to counter by saying the HOA president had every right to enforce rules, but the judge wasn't buying it. Midway through the proceedings, the judge turned to Karen with a raised eyebrow. "It seems this case has less to do with the fence and more to do with your personal grievances against the defendant," the judge said sharply. Karen's smug demeanor faltered for the first time. The judge then noted that the HOA's own rules supported my position and questioned why Karen had pursued legal action in the first place. "This appears to be an abuse of authority," the judge concluded, sending a ripple of murmurs through the courtroom. Karen's face turned red as she tried to stammer out a response, but it was clear her case was unraveling. The judge's words hung in the air like a hammer strike, and Karen's confidence seemed to crumble with every passing second. My lawyer took this opportunity to emphasize how Karen had crossed the line repeatedly. "This isn't just about a fence," he stated firmly. "It's about an individual using their position of power to harass and intimidate homeowners for personal reasons. This is a pattern of behavior, not an isolated incident." The courtroom was silent, apart from Karen's fidgeting. Even her lawyer looked uncomfortable, realizing that their case was slipping away. Then came the moment that turned the tide completely in my favor. My lawyer presented evidence of other fences in the neighborhood that were nearly identical to mine. Photos of these fences, along with statements from their owners, proved that Karen had selectively targeted me. One of the homeowners had even written a letter explaining how Karen had approved their fence without issue just a few months earlier. The double standard was undeniable. The judge reviewed the photos and sighed heavily. "It seems clear that the HOA's enforcement has been inconsistent at best, and discriminatory at worst," the judge said, giving Karen a pointed look. Karen, now visibly flustered, tried to defend herself. "I was just trying to maintain the community's standards," she stammered. But the judge wasn't having it. "Maintaining standards doesn't mean selectively targeting homeowners or overstepping your authority," the judge replied sternly. "The HOA guidelines exist to ensure fairness, not to be used as a weapon against individuals." At that moment, I saw Karen's composure completely collapse. The judge announced a recess to review the final arguments, and Karen stormed out of the courtroom, her face a mix of fury and humiliation. When the court reconvened after the recess, the atmosphere was tense but leaned in my favor. The judge wasted no time delivering the verdict. "Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that the defendant did not violate any HOA guidelines," the judge declared. "Furthermore, the HOA's lawsuit appears to be frivolous and driven by personal bias rather than legitimate concerns." I could feel a wave of relief wash over me, but the judge wasn't done yet. Turning to Karen, the judge added, "As the president of the HOA, you have a responsibility to act fairly and professionally. Your behavior in this case has demonstrated the opposite. To my surprise, the judge went even further. The court ruled not only in my favor but also ordered the HOA to cover my legal fees. This was a huge win, as Karen's vendetta had cost me time, money, and peace of mind. The judge also recommended that the HOA board review Karen's position as president, citing her misuse of authority. Karen sat stiffly in her seat, her face pale. The humiliation was clear, and I couldn't help but feel a small sense of justice. As I left the courtroom, a few of my neighbors who had attended the hearing approached me. "I'm so glad you stood up to her," one said. "She's been making life miserable for so many of us." Another added, "Maybe now things will change around here." Their support meant the world to me, especially after everything I'd endured. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace returning. But I knew this wasn't just about me. This was about putting an end to Karen's reign of terror in the neighborhood. Karen's downfall didn't stop at the courtroom. Word spread quickly around the neighborhood about the court's ruling and her behavior. At the next HOA meeting, which I made sure to attend, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The once intimidating Karen now looked small and defeated as several homeowners voiced their grievances. One neighbor stood up and recounted how Karen had fined them for planting flowers in their yard, claiming they were against the rules. Another spoke about how she had threatened them with legal action over a minor driveway crack. It became clear that Karen had spent years bullying residents under the guise of enforcing HOA policies. Finally, one of the board members, Mr. Davis, addressed the room. "We've heard enough," he said firmly. "This isn't what our HOA was meant to be. We're here to support and improve our community, not to intimidate or harass." I moved to hold a vote on removing Karen from her position as president. The room erupted into murmurs of agreement. Karen's face turned bright red as she tried to defend herself, claiming that everything she had done was for the good of the neighborhood. But no one was buying it anymore. The vote was unanimous. Karen was officially removed as HOA president. As she packed up her things and left the meeting in silence, I couldn't help but feel a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, it seemed like the neighborhood was united against her toxic behavior. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me personally for taking a stand. "You started this," one of them said. "Because of you, we finally spoke up." It was a bittersweet moment. I hadn't intended to become the face of change, but I was proud that my fight had made a difference. With Karen removed as HOA president, the neighborhood began to feel like a completely different place. The new HOA leadership, led by Mr. Davis, made it clear that they wanted to rebuild trust with the community. One of their first actions was to review the HOA's policies and remove unnecessary rules that had been used to harass homeowners. They also created a fairer process for approving changes, ensuring that no one would have to face the same ordeal I had. For the first time in years, homeowners felt like they had a voice. Karen, on the other hand, completely withdrew from neighborhood affairs. Rumor had it she was trying to sell her house and move elsewhere, though she avoided speaking to anyone directly. Occasionally, I'd see her in passing, and while she still gave me a cold glare, it no longer fazed me. She had lost her power, and the community had finally stood up to her bullying. It felt like justice, not just for me, but for everyone who had suffered under her reign. Reflecting on everything, I realized that standing up for myself wasn't just about the fence. It was about refusing to let someone else's pettiness and power trips dictate my life. The experience had been exhausting, but it taught me the importance of standing firm and seeking justice, even when the odds seem stacked against you. In the end, the fence remained exactly where it was, a symbol of perseverance and a reminder that even the most entitled people can be held accountable.